everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and welcome to night 5 of the 2021 Summer Mini Skein mini-series. Tonight we are going to revisit a favorite technique of mine, and that is dip dyeing to break colors. If you've been a ChemKnits fan for a really long time, you know I love to start with a mixture color and then see how the different pigments in there will bind at different rates. So then you end up with multiple different hues on your finished yarn. And it is so much fun. For this acid dye color breaking technique today, we're actually going to revisit dipping chains of mini skeins. So I will be attaching these minis together in a long chain so we can get this variegated type gradient based on the resist of the chains. It is something that is a lot of fun, and well, let's go get into the project. We are going to start off with 15 20-gram mini skeins of Wool to Dye For's Crazy 8. This is an 8-ply DK weight yarn that is 100% superwash merino. And what's really fun about the yarn is it's actually a 4-ply of 2 plies, which gives it a very high twist, round, bouncy feel. And I think that we could have some really, really fun effects on the space with this technique. Right, we are going to start the process by taking one of these mini skeins, and yeah, I guess the first one we are going to just sort of divide into fourths. And then after that, I'm going to take the mini, fold it in half in a loop, and then insert it in. And so this is going to be our chain. It's going to be a little bit loose. And I think I'm going to aim to do all 15 on here. So it's going to be as though we have an extraordinarily long chain of chains. But anyway, this is the plan, and I am going to go and add all of the yarn on here. Not only is making a chain of mini skeins like this a really great way to store mini skeins, but it is a really fun way to dye yarn, because as we dye the yarn, there will be resists within this chain because of where there is tension from where one mini is pulling on the next one in the chain, but also because the yarn is relatively crowded in its areas. And so this could lead to uneven dye penetration, which will add some fun variegated feel to our overall dip dyed technique. For this last one, I am going to add a removable nylon zip tie so that way things don't unravel. And whew, look at this beautiful chain. This chain is at least 4 feet long, and it'll probably be longer when wet and when stretched. So I'm going to have to think really carefully about how I'm going to manage this length as I am dip dyeing the yarn. I know that we're gonna have something fun, and this is just a really fun way to arrange the yarn for dyeing. We're gonna start with some dip dyeing today. I think probably in a combination of black and purple pop. This is something I've done with sort of this chain before, except I did that on a really long attached skein versus mini skeins. I am gonna pre-soak pretty much until our dye bath is warm. I don't think it needs to be that wet, but let's go set up the dye bath. Since we are using commercial acid dyes today, everything is dedicated for dyeing yarn and not used for food. In my stainless steel 12-quart pot, I have 24 cups of water, and I'm going to add 180 milliliters of white vinegar. 1 tablespoon of white vinegar is 15 milliliters, so this is as though I added 12 tablespoons of white vinegar, which would give us a ratio of 4 tablespoons of white vinegar to 8 cups of water. This is a lot higher than I usually start. I think my baseline is around 2 tablespoons of vinegar per 8 cups of water. But I do want the colors to strike relatively quickly. And Once we mix some purple pop in with black, that might take some extra time to absorb. Now I need to let this heat up, and so while we're doing that, let's go take a look at our dye for today. Now the dyes I'm planning to work with today are already in solution, but if you're going to mix starting with dry powder, make sure that you wear a respirator mask and safety glasses whenever you're dealing with dry dye powder. Today we're going to start with a 1% stock solution of Dharma True Black and a 1% stock solution of Dharma Purple Pop. The reason why I want to use this particular combination is that I've showed that with this general kind of resist technique, you will get blacks that maybe will start to lean a little purple, depending on how much purple pop we have in there, with some breaking with some of these pinks from the purple pop showing through. And so I thought that that would be a really fun place to start for this colorway. We've got 300 grams of yarn that we're dip dyeing, and I think I want to start with, well, let's see how much black we've got. I think maybe 200 milliliters of the True Black, if I have it. Yep, I do. Now, stock solutions can shift a bit over time. You should always shake them well if you're using a stock solution, but stock solutions are the most accurate in terms of their concentration after you've mixed it. And that's because different dyes might crash out and settle over time. And so it's just something to be aware of. If you want the most reproducible results with your recipes, I would mix the dyes fresh when you want to use them. Which isn't to say that if I use 200 milliliters of this and then I were to go and measure out 2 grams of True Black, dissolve it in 200 milliliters of dye, that the total pigmentation would be really, really close. It is really, really close. It's just, there was one time when I was doing a project and I used the exact same amount of the same stock solution bottle, but months apart, and the color that I got the second time was significantly darker. And so that has, even though I shook it up while I was using it, so that has just led me to be a little more wary about that. Purple Pop is a beautiful, beautiful color. It packs a punch, and you absolutely do not want to use it at a 1% depth of shade strength. In my opinion, too much of this dye is 1 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn. That's just way too much. But I think that what we'll do is we'll use 3 tablespoons or 45 milliliters of this color, if I have that much. And I would say of all of the dye stocks, this Purple Pop dye stock is the oldest one that I have. And I made, I think 500 milliliters of it, and it's taken me years to go through it because I use it all the time. It's just, you really don't need very much of that pigment. Now this color here is very, very black looking. I'm curious if it'll show up on a paper towel. Maybe not. Maybe there's not enough liquid that the black overpowers it. I think our dye stock is probably a little too concentrated to show any breaking, which who knows if it'll happen. We'll see. But here you can see the breaking in the Purple Pop, where you see this purple center and this bright pink halo. It might look like, oh, it's subtle here, but it can be very extreme. Those blues in there struck super fast. We are still heating up over here, but I'm gonna go ahead and add the dye so that way I can rinse out the container before the plastic might melt. So the color actually feels black with like a hint of purple, which honestly, that's what it is. So as soon as this is heated up, then we'll get ready to dip dye. All right, we are getting nice and warm. I am standing on a step stool to help give myself some height to manage this. I did squeeze out a lot of the pre-soak water. Oh, that's pretty. And I'm not gonna worry about balance here. A lot of times, this is something that I worry about a lot in terms of like, if I'm gonna dip dye something, I want it to feel like there's a reasonable ratio between the darkest colors and the lightest colors. And it's okay if the darkest end absorbs the most. I do want there to be some differences. I haven't even dip dyed half of it yet. Each time I am slowly adding more and more, but that end is in there to stay. And the more I add, and you can see that color is definitely getting lighter. It's not just because, you know, as I add it, if I were to put everything else in, I think that it would be fairly pale. I don't know. Maybe I used too much black. We will see. We will see. And again, if the end is very, very black, I can absolutely over dye part of it to, and I suppose we could take this apart and rearrange the chain and dip into another color. There's a lot of different ways we could play with this. And ooh, see, it's getting pinker, or I guess purpler already. Because as I go in here, that's just not very, it's mostly this like pinky purple left. All right, I think I'm gonna go ahead and put everything in. And so we've got from a black to this paler purple color. And this is, again, just the beginning. We might dip, but not dip completely into various colors and areas. There are a lot of options to us. So now I am going to heat this for 30 minutes, but we will probably need to let this cool completely because those pinks, that's often what they need. But I guess it depends a little bit on the ratio of yarn to dye. So we'll check back in on this in 30 minutes. Oh man, this is amazing and looks gloriously glazed. Why do I get glazing when that isn't what I'm going for? Oh man, that's beautiful. Oh, this is fun. Okay, there's definitely, you can see that pink left. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Because we might decide to reevaluate and dye more on the darker end. I am changing my mind. There seems to be a lot that's dark. I'm gonna turn off the heat now and leave things in here to cool so we can absorb the rest of those pinks. And then we'll take a look at this, see how it is, and decide if I want to open it up a little bit or what. And that'll also help us get a sense of how dark that darkest color is. Because no matter what, there will be resist points down there, so we'll be able to add some other pops of color. But man, I forgot how much I loved this colorway and doing this combination of purple pop and black. Oh man, man, oh man. All right, we will be back in a little while. Or really a long while. It'll probably take hours to cool. The dye bath is now completely cool. And this glazing that we have on here is delightful. So I am going to remove this from the pot, and you can see that our water is completely clear. Let's lay it out. This is absolutely gorgeous. You can see some of these resists peeking out, and there's less on the darker ones, but it's still there, and then more as it gets lighter. But now I'm having a massive, massive debate with myself. Confession time. I originally planned to have this be one stage and to dye this in multiple ways, forgetting how much I love this combination of purple pop and black. And let's open this up and see what we have, because I think that I'm going to leave it as is because this is just breathtakingly stunning. Part of it is the yarn base for sure, because Crazy 8 is high twist. But I plan to retry this with a few other yarn bases as well. And we'll make some fresh, I guess we won't be making fresh purple pop, I've still got a lot of that, but we'll make some fresh black dye. But you can see that low level of black. Maybe we need to keep going for glazing with like high volume of water and adding the yarn so it can float through. So a lot of volume of water, give that yarn space to move, and then not move it more and let that dye slowly come into contact with the yarn striking at the surface. Maybe that seems to be what's working best with glazing. Now we are going to open this up. I could wash it as it is, but I want to see the yarn. Ooh. So you can see little bits of that resist. And ooh, we have a little bit of white in here. I'm trying to be very careful as I open this because with mini skeins, it is really, really easy to get them tangled. And that is not what I want. Now I'm going to keep carefully opening these up and lay them out in the order that they were dyed. So we can see the entire progression over these 300 grams of yarn. This is so pretty. I have done this colorway on a full skein. That was a super long skein, and so it was a repeating gradient. And I even have a swatch from that video, which I will insert in here. This will knit up so gorgeously, but will give us more of a complete gradient or fade, and I love it. I have played with making a breaking color like this using some other fluorescent dyes, using I think both radioactive and lemon yellow. There I was doing twisted skeins versus this kind of technique, but I just love this so much that I'm excited to do this on more bases and then compare them to one another at the end. I will admit, I had a completely different video idea in mind. An idea that I probably edited around a bit because I'm going to use that idea in a different video I'm going to go film right now. So I just want to throw in there that sometimes you might have a grand plan with multiple steps and multiple colors, but then you hit the first step and you're just like, I don't want to do anything to this. This is so perfect. I want to leave it as is. Occasionally I keep going. Today, I consider this perfection. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to take every third skein to 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I was like, did I not take enough? To start creating our fade sets. Now, we could shift the way things are later on, but I think that, and as we see the last one remaining, I think that you'll see that what we have left works just as beautifully together as what this wider one did. And for that, I am thankful. And I think some of the differences in the black will be a little more apparent as we go on, but I would say that for not worrying about whether or not I was dipping evenly, this turned out really, really nice. And so being able to divide it up and have multiple sets all together helps. Because even if it was completely unbalanced with so much more on the dark end, the fact that we were doing this over 15 skeins means that the darkest is over more yarn than it might have been otherwise. But this is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So now I'm going to go wash this yarn and we'll set up to do this on some other yarn bases. Let's wash our yarn. I've got just some cool plain tap water here. Well, there could be some bleeding with this, but let's see. I just added some clear dish soap. Purple pop is finicky, but also black sometimes does have a little bit of bleeding. But I see like maybe a hint from some of that black, a barely there hint that does just rinse out. And so I'm so excited with this color. All right, let's see. Yeah, that is good. I'm gonna finish rinsing out the soap, put this through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and we'll reset to dye some more. For the next round of dyeing, I picked 3 yarn bases. I made another chain of the Crazy 8 because I want to see, especially with a fresh black, in case there are some differences with the stock, I want to see if I'm seeing the same results. Next, I went for a nice high twist 2-ply sock yarn. This is Wool to Die For's titanium sock that is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. It is a fingering weight yarn, and so I thought it would be fun to compare. And finally, well, maybe not finally, because there's a chance I might still go pick a 4th yarn base, I grabbed some That Yak, which is 70% superwash merino, 20% yak, and 10% nylon. This yarn has this gorgeous cool toned oatmeal brown color with a little bit of Berber pulling almost from just the way that the fibers were blended and spun probably. And I just really want to see what this color will look like on this base. I've really enjoyed incorporating this base into a lot of these summer mini Skein mini series videos because it's so fun to see not just how different colorways look on different types of blends and twists, but also on different natural colors of yarn. Before we start dip dyeing, I am going to go and pre-soak all of this yarn for at least 30 minutes in plain tap water. I made a 1% stock solution of some more purple pulp and a 2% stock solution of True Black. The 2% stock has 2 grams of dye per 100 milliliters of liquid, and the 1% is 1 gram of dye per 100 milliliters. I decided to increase the amount of purple pop a little bit, and so I used 4 tablespoons of purple pop of this new stock, and then 100 milliliters, so 2 grams of dye, of the True Black for each of our dye mixtures. I'm only setting up 2 right now because I have 2 pots, so I'm going to dye 2 at a time. I added this dye to a stainless steel dye pot with 24 cups of water and around 190 to 200 milliliters of white vinegar, just as we set up for the first time. The only real difference here is that we have slightly more purple pop than we did previously. And then I took the pre-soaked chain of mini skeins and dip dyed it into the pot. Starting with the Crazy 8, so that way I would have a comparison point, but then I went over to my other dye pot on the other side of the stove and dip dyed the Wool to Die For titanium chain into here. While this was happening, I went ahead, since these dye stocks were freshly mixed, and aliquoted out the dye that I would need for the next 1 or 2 dye baths to use with the yak and maybe 1 other chain, which I'm not sure if I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to set aside the dye just in case. And I did this because that would give us a consistency that we can use when we set up the new dye bath. So I just set that up off camera in a glass mason jar to save until I was ready to use it. After I finished dip dyeing the yarn, I let everything sit for 30 minutes with low heat, and then I turned off the heat to let the yarn cool completely to give time for that purple pop to absorb. I had some leftover purple pop and True Black that was rinsed off the spoons and containers, and I thought it would be fun to use it with a coolish or warm bath type technique. I added 100 grams of dry stroll fingering weight yarn, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, to a plastic shoebox with 8 cups of warm tap water and this leftover dye. Once I got the yarn saturated and that dye distributed over it, I then added 3 tablespoons of white vinegar and left it to go sit overnight so that way the dye could slowly absorb until I have a pot available to help set this color with heat. There actually wasn't as much dye left over as it appeared. The color is going to be fairly pastel, but you'll notice that the blacks did start striking the yarn before I did add that acid that I almost forgot. My tap water does run slightly acidic, and so this is something we see. I'm not sure if starting with this warm tap water and this long time scale, if the purple pop will absorb or if we'll have to kettle dye it, but I'm excited to find out. All of the leftover dye absorbed to the yarn after 24 hours. And then as I set up the next round of dye pots, I moved the yarn around, dissolved or rinsed out the containers with leftover dye in just some water, and then poured that on top again to let it sit. And I think that this like gray and pink broken colorway we have is gorgeous. Once all of this final color has absorbed, I will go and steam set this yarn off camera for 30 minutes in a steamer basket and then wash it and hang to dry like I do with all of my yarn. I was super excited to dip dye the That Yak yarn into this colorway. Really curious how these pinks and blacks will show through on this oatmeal brown base. It might be really hard for me to tell when wet, so I will reserve judgment until it is dry. Finally, I pre-soaked 15 20-gram mini skeins of Wool to Dye Force Platinum Sock, which, like titanium, is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, but this yarn is 4-ply and is a little bit loftier versus the titanium, which is 2-ply, and therefore has a bit of a higher twist to it. They actually both have the same yardage, so they are very, very similar, but I'm curious to see if the platinum will absorb dye in a way that feels similar to the titanium or not. Given that the first time I did this type of colorway, I used a really long skein of Wool to Dye Force Platinum Sock. So I thought this was a fitting final base to add to this video. I washed all of this yarn off camera, and now let's go look at all of this yarn dry still in the chains. Here is the round 2 of this colorway on 4 different bases. We have the Crazy 8, which is 100% superwash merino. We have Titanium Sock, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, 2-ply. Platinum Sock, which is the same 75-25, but it's 4-ply, so therefore the twist is different and each individual ply is a little thinner. And finally, we have That Yak, which is 70% superwash merino, 20% yak, 10% nylon. Overall, pulled back, all of these look very, very similar, with the exception of the yak, mainly because the yak starts out as sort of a medium, cool-toned brown versus the off-white that we see from our just superwash merino or merino and only nylon blends. Pulled back, I could say that the main difference is, goodness, I do feel glazing on these 3. And I am not sure if the twist makes a huge difference. The one place where I think it can make a difference, having a 2-ply or a super high twist 8-ply versus a little bit of a loftier 4-ply, is that as you're dyeing the yarn, especially as it is getting a little bit stretched with the dip dyeing and moved, when the dyes absorb to the yarn and then sort of relax back as it dries, the fibers can move, will move a little bit in that process, giving us this effect where you feel like you have this haze of black over the pink. But let me zoom in. Here on the Crazy 8, and I think it's a bit blown out right now, but it feels less like you have pink and black layered and more that you've got pink with this super light, uneven layer of black on top of it. And that is that glazed feeling that I absolutely love. And if we were to take some of these strands and untwist it, you can feel like I mean, I think I'm a little too far zoomed out for you to see, but you can feel an unevenness in the way that that color took up. And that is in part from having that high acid, but also just the time for the rest of those colors to absorb quickly once it comes into contact with the yarn, and makes this extra beautiful. The titanium has a bit of a similar feel from the Crazy 8. I think that the glaze might feel a little more dramatic over here because of how just round and bouncy this yarn is, and so as like it stretches and moves, but it is definitely still apparent on titanium. And you still have that glazed feel on the platinum as well. It feels like the colors are layered in a way more than just that they're broken, which is really fun. And again, this works because that pink and the purple pop takes so long to absorb to the fiber that the black is going to strike really quickly, and then the pink has more time to penetrate further into the fibers, giving us this one pot difference in application that is so wonderful. So I definitely feel more glazing here than when, like last Hanukkah, I was attempting to do the glazing. So I, again, have a lot to work on with my techniques overall, but I just love the way that this colorway comes out. The yak is a little bit of a standout in that I do think I feel a little bit of glazing on the palest ones. The medium ones, it's a little harder to feel because I think there's a difference in the amount of brightness that we have. Like this lightest color feels a lot more like one of the medium ones from the other skeins. I think that it is gorgeous and has a subtlety to it. And certainly we are going to have variation within these as we open them up. There is resist in here from how the yarn is dip dyed. But I think that the yak, since it absorbs color slower overall, I think that that gives us more of a difference here compared to those other three bases. So when it comes to, and I mean, this wasn't an attempt at a glazing video, but I think having thicker, I guess it's a toss-up between having both really high twist, like we do in the Crazy 8, or having thicker plies. Because the thicker the ply, the easier it is for dye to strike to the outside and not necessarily penetrate all the way through. If you have a super thin ply, if the dye strikes in one spot, it's probably going to strike through that whole ply. So I think that that is sort of why maybe we might see a bit of a difference. But either way, I love how this turned out, and I need to go and open all of these up. I decided to pick two to open up on camera and then twist up the mini skeins so that way you could just see the progression. I am going to be showing this on the titanium sock, which is that 2-ply fingering weight yarn, and on that yak, because I mean, I'm curious how the overall progression that we see compares from the yak to the others. But as for our platinum sock and the last batch of our Crazy 8, I am going to go ahead and do that, the twisting and the opening up off camera, but we will show all of the twisted mini skeins in just a moment. Here are the 4 sets of 15, which again are that yak, platinum, titanium, and then Crazy 8 yarn. I would say the difference on where the lightest pink starts, at least on those 3, really depends on the rates of the dip dyeing. That's some of the variability that you could see. And so if I had done just 4 different skeins of our platinum sock, we probably would have different levels of where this brightest pink showed up on all of them. Therefore, some of the differences that we see between these sets right now really isn't about the yarn base, but the rate that I was dipping. I think that when we are looking at how the depth of color within the yarn, that was more up with the different yarn bases. But again, this is something that I want to play around with more. I've been meaning to do this with, say, using like radioactive and forest green and things like that. I've played around with some of those combinations with resists, but not with dip dyeing quite like this. So if there's other color combinations you'd like to see me try, let me know down in the comments below. All right, I have just brought out our first set that we had opened up on camera. And the thing that the yarn being dry really illustrates is the difference between the blacks. I'm not sure how well it is turning up on camera, but the last skeins have more of a deep true black, and there's more charcoal with more pink showing through as we go further down. So looking at it initially, some of these may not feel the most balanced, but as we rearrange it, skip two, skip two, skip two, and then boop, 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 boop. As we rearrange these sets, there is a difference between these two blacks. And I think that if we had done these dips with smaller skeins, so instead of having 15 minis, if we had had only 5, it would probably be a little easier to control the spread. But I think that being able to break up each set into 3 helps you get a really gorgeous fade set. I think that these differences are also very apparent here on the That Yak, where the color difference between all of them is more subtle overall, but there are, as we've done with our depths of shade of black, even a 4% depth of shade of black is way deeper and more black than say a 2%. And not that I know that it's dip dyed, so everything is a gradient, but there is, it might be subtle, but we still have a beautiful fade here, and I'm so excited! I know I told all of you to chat about different colors down below that you'd want to see me play with, but I know that this combination of purple pop and black is something I will return to over and over and over again. I absolutely love it. Before we sign off, I have one more beautiful skein of yarn to show off. This was a skein of Knit Pick Stroll, and we had some leftover dye, which really wasn't as much as I had anticipated. We have this beautiful pastel pink and gray broken colorway here. That is a lot of fun. But I think in contrast with all of the fades behind it, you can see how we really did not have as much color left as I thought. Dip dyeing to break colors is one of my favorite techniques ever, and it doesn't always work as dramatically with acid dyes as it does with food coloring, because the rates that different acid dye pigments bind to yarn isn't necessarily as extreme as some of those food coloring molecules that we know and love. I wanted to take a moment and chat about why we might dye a mini skein fade set versus dyeing a blank, a knit piece of fabric in a technique like this, where you can have a gradient that you dip dye that is all attached, so you don't have multiple different skeins of yarn. I might have discussed this in the conclusions of one of the other summer mini skein mini-series video, but I feel like it's always worth chatting about a little bit more. A downside of having a set of 5 mini skeins versus a single stranded blank in one piece is that you've got more ends to deal with. But a plus side is that because they're already broken up, you have more control over where those color transitions start to take place. So if you're doing mittens or a sock, you can plan it out so that way you get all of those colors in that smaller project. Whereas if you're using a single stranded knit blank and you knit one sock, it wouldn't really be easy to go back and forth between 2 pairs of socks with the blank. You could, but you'd have to cut it, which, you know, sort of decreases that purpose. Now, double stranded knit blanks do absolutely exist. And so those unravel into matched 50-gram balls of yarn. And so you could use that to do matching socks. And I think that that is something that works really, really well. But you still don't necessarily have control over where you want those color transitions to happen. So this is just one reason why you may want mini skeins versus a blank or vice versa. Also, when you're dyeing blanks, you do get resist in there, which can give some beautiful modeling and speckling, just based on the fact that you're dyeing a knit piece of fabric. And the effect is similar to the resist that we saw from dip dyeing this chain, just on a much smaller scale, which again is a different effect and a tool that is fun to take advantage of when you're dyeing yarn. And speaking of blanks, I actually dyed a single-stranded blank in Platinum Sock with the same color rate of this video. And actually, I dyed blanks from the techniques in a couple of these other Summer Mini Skein mini-series videos. That'll be a Dye Pot Weekly episode that will be up in July or August this summer. So please make sure that you are subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and have your notifications turned on so you never miss a video and you don't miss fun other discussions like this. And in this video, I will at least compare the blanks that we got to pictures of the Summer Mini Skein mini-series sets that I created, and I'm really excited. But I need to go pop this back on my drying rack because I literally just washed it this morning. Ultimately, whether or not you want to dye fade sets with mini skeins or you want to dye fade sets from a blank or with full skeins, minis are a really fun way to play around and experiment with different techniques. But in the end, whether you're playing with blanks or mini skeins, it just comes down to the dyer's preference and also the knitter or crocheter or weaver's preference and what you would like to work with and would be easiest for you to work with. It is a little bit easier and faster, I think, to make your own mini skeins than it is to necessarily make your own blanks, but both are possible and both are techniques that I highly recommend that you play around with. I think that it is so much fun to play with these mini skein sets in this chain. And actually, some people definitely will store their fade sets in like this chain that we used for dyeing because it looks pretty and you can see them all together in a really nice way. I've never done that. I usually twist them up, but it would be fun to like twist up the chain at the end of some of these other videos. Maybe I'll do that next year. But if you're interested in seeing me play more with other techniques with this kind of chain of mini skeins, stay tuned because tomorrow morning I actually have a Dye Pot Weekly that will feature mini skeins that will dip dye and then dye again to add more color. So I'm really excited for you to see that video. I thought it would be fun if the Dye Pot Weekly episodes this week also involved mini skeins to sort of flesh out this week-long event. Also coming up, Night 6 of the Summer Mini Skein miniseries will be up tomorrow night, and we do have a bonus summer colorway that will be out the night after that. If you love the yarn I dye and want to bring some home, I don't have any more of the Summer Mini Skein sets, but I do have some of the yarn mops and leave no dye behind skeins featured in these videos in my Etsy shop, ChemKnits Creations. There will be a link down in the video description if you want to go check out some of the yarn that I've dyed. Almost all of the yarn in the shop has been featured in one of my videos, and so it's a really great way to support the content here at the same time as getting some really fun hand-dyed yarn. But anyway, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. What do you think we might see tomorrow night? I am so excited to share this project with you. Thank you so much for watching.